Hey guys, Will here. So today's video is one that has been requested many times over the course of the last little while. It's been quite some time now since we first looked at the DD1 and DD2 wheelbases from Fanatec. And in that time, the market has evolved quite a lot. We've seen new brands come to fruition as well. Moza, VRS Direct Force Pro came out. Simucube have had a couple of evolutions of their wheelbases too. Simagic have released a bunch of new stuff. There's been all kinds of new options enter the market. So what we wanted to do today is give you a bit of an update on how things have evolved for the Fanatec ecosystem since the last time we took a look. They have made quite a few updates to their software and focused quite heavily on the user experience out of the box as well. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today, checking out the DD1 and the DD2, seeing what the experience is like if you were to buy one of these as it stands at the start of 2023, not only from a user experience out of the box, setting up software and what you can do in terms of that, but also of course the all important driving experience. So let's get started. So I wanted to start this journey at the very beginning, obviously downloading the latest drivers and Fanalab version. Now they are still packaging Fanalab and the drivers separately, which is something that I've been complaining about for a number of years now. Don't know why they don't just package it all in the one executable, have it all installed together, because I know quite a few people do still have problems that are caused by a mismatch between the version of Fanalab they're running and the drivers and firmware that they're running. So I've gone ahead, jumped onto the Fanatec forums and downloaded the latest version of the driver, which is a beta version 448, and that also recommends a compatible version of Fanalab 2. So we've downloaded both of those, and that's what we have on the screen here now. So I wanted to start by going through the firmware update process, because this is something that used to be a little bit clunky on Fanatec stuff. So we can see here, as soon as we've opened up the driver utility, it's showing us that there is a firmware update available for the base, the motor firmware in the base, as well as the steering wheel that we've got connected. Now I have the pedals connected via the base at the moment, so they're not going to show up as a firmware updatable device. And you can also see a nice little red indicator here saying new firmware update available. So we're going to click on Open Firmware Manager, and it lists all the devices that we have updates available for. So we do still have the option for the manual firmware update process, just like what we used to have to do, but we're going to click on this update button here. And it's popped up with a prompt just telling us if we want to downgrade firmware, we need to follow a different process, and also telling us a couple of the key highlights in the more recent firmware updates. We're going to click on OK. Another little prompt here just telling us that the fan in the wheelbase might go crazy while it's doing the firmware update. So we're going to click OK again, and let's see what happens here. So it opens up the firmware updater. You used to kind of have to go through each device individually and click on them, and it was quite easy for things to go a little bit funny in between. So you can see there, wheel is spinning around, so it's just doing a initial calibration and everything on the base. There we go, that's the motor spinning up to 100%. AI tuning menu settings will be reset to factory defaults after the wheelbase firmware update. Save current tuning menu settings and reload after the firmware. So that's a cool option too. So we can actually have our settings go back in. Now I blew away all the settings because I want to start from scratch with those two and sort of see how I feel about the driving experience and fine tuning. We're going to click OK again now. We're going to turn off the tuning menu settings and let's go. So wheelbase has now spun down again, and we can see now it's going through and doing the next stage of the firmware update. So each individual component here is the same as what it used to be, but we've got this sort of overarching manager software now that's kind of taking us through the process in a more automated fashion. So it's actually really cool. Okay, so next steps, wheel center calibration and H-shifter calibration. We don't have an H-shifter connected. Now it's giving us a few instructions. So remove steering wheel from wheelbase. We can do that. We'll just loosen the collar. Pop the wheel off, don't hit myself in the chin, done that a few times before. So don't touch the wheel axis during rotation, remove the steering wheel, done that, click the calibrate button, wait until the calibration is finished. Very straightforward. We're going to see the motor shaft spinning around and doing its thing. Much better user experience than what it was previously. So next, steering wheel is not attached, please attach a steering wheel. Tighten up the collar again, and then click OK. All right, wheel center calibration. Make sure the steering wheel is physically centered. Click the calibrate button and the next button to proceed. So wheel is centered. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Calibrate. There we go. That is the center calibrated. And it even prompts us here. It even shows a little screen on the dash there that tells us that that's done. Click next. Okay, now it's going to update the steering wheel. So again, it's done it all automatically. All I had to do is just click next on the wizard, and there we go. That is the steering wheel fully updated. All right, so it wants us to calibrate the center again. So calibrate, next. If you have any other steering wheels, you can attach them now and update those too, but we're not going to do that for now. So we're going to click on finished. If you want to downgrade, again, it's giving us another prompt telling us how to downgrade if we want to do that. So, and it's also forcing us to read that. It's saying can't proceed until the countdown time is finished. I understand. All Fanatec devices are now up to date. Firmware manager can be closed. So hopefully it's as simple as that for you guys. Now we do still see the occasional person having firmware update issues, getting stuck, things like that. But look, if everything goes the way it's meant to, that is a much smoother process than it has been in the past. So that definitely gets a thumbs up from me. Let's jump into the software now, have a quick poke around there, and then we'll get into what's different in the driving experience. So let's take a look now at the driver software and some of the changes that they've made there. So we're having a look here at our wheelbase values, and remembering again, we also do have the tuning menu on the wheel that allows us to adjust these settings. And I'll show you that in just a minute. But what I wanted to do here is give you a bit of an overview of some of the stuff we have available. Most of it is the same as what we had before, so we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time here, but I wanted to highlight this new auto setup. Now what this does is it automatically brings in values for the game that you're playing. So it detects the game that you've loaded and automatically puts in some baseline settings, which they think will be good for you. Now we'll test those out in just a minute, but again, this is something that's really good for accessibility. Before, it could be quite daunting, and with a lot of other wheelbases too, it is quite daunting. When you first fire up, you don't really know what you're doing, you don't really know what settings are good, and it can feel pretty horrible. So having something that gives you a good experience out of the box is a really positive thing. And I'm really glad to see they're doing lots of little things like this that just add to that user experience, make it a lot better straight out of the box. So just to show you quickly again, for those who might not be familiar, the tuning menu system. On the wheel itself, you push the button, it takes you to that auto setup mode. You can use your funky switch here, or your 7-way switch, to go between auto setup, setup 1, setup 2, setup 3, setup 4, or setup 5. So what that allows you to do is have 5 separate setups that you can tune for each individual car that you're driving, each sim that you're driving, or whatnot. So if you're flicking between, say, formula cars and street cars, something like that, you might want to have completely different settings for your wheelbase to, you know, make the force feedback feel realistic. This allows you to switch between those really easily, but not only that, it also lets you switch between them without having to Alt-Tab out of the game, which is really handy. There's nothing worse than getting set up, you're on the grid for a race, realize that you got the settings wrong, you Alt-Tab out, quits the game, and you miss a start, something like that. So being able to change it here is really powerful, and that's one of the things that I've always been a big fan of within the Fanatec ecosystem. So starting off on auto setup, if we push up on our 7-way funky switch and then to the right, this goes into the menu that allows us to adjust all these individual settings. So it all matches exactly what you see on your screen there for all the various different settings. So sensitivity, force feedback, strength, scale, natural damper, natural friction, natural inertia, force feedback interpolation, force effect intensity, and so forth, all the way through all the same settings. So the way we would adjust those is simply just rotate the 7-way funky switch to make that adjustment. So again, really cool, something that you can adjust on the fly. And if we quickly take this wheel off, I just want to quickly show you what it looks like with the button module endurance on the Porsche 911 GTR wheel too. So we'll pop that on. There we go, slide that on, pull the button. There we are. Crank it up quickly too. Enable torque, and we see it loads into ITM mode, and then when we push our tuning menu button, we get exactly the same display that we have on our DD2. So just a little bit more information there, makes it a little bit more easily discernible, but you can do all the same functions on the other wheel as we saw before. So we'll whack that off again, and we'll go back to the other wheel. So other than that, the core functionality within this is all pretty much the same as we had before, just a slightly cleaner interface. You can see here adjustments for our steering wheel too, so we can switch between the different modes for our analog paddles if we have them installed on the wheel and so forth. We can adjust our pedals, our shifter if we have one connected to, and so forth. So pretty self-explanatory here. Now I also just want to quickly load up Fanalab for you too. So we have a duplicate here, and again, I don't really understand why they don't just integrate all of this into the same software package. Maybe they'll comment down below and let us know. I'm sure there must be a reason, otherwise they would have done it by now, but we've got the same tuning menu settings as we saw previously in the driver software. We've got adjustments here for dynamic force feedback too. So this is force feedback that does different things depending on the telemetry coming out of the game rather than just the direct input force feedback signal that's coming out of the game. Now, this is something I would have liked to have seen them do a little bit more with in the time since we last looked at it. Still only really has the speed sensitive stuff going on. I was hoping that maybe we might see some telemetry based effects like what we're starting to see in some other wheelbases now. Most notably probably True Force with the Logitech G wheels, so the G Pro and the G923, although it's not real great on the G923, let's be honest. So if we go across now to vibration, this allows us to make adjustments to the vibration motors on our V3 pedals if we have them connected, as well as the vibration motors inside the steering wheel. So in this case, we do actually have some adjustments here. And I'm not going to take you through every single setting here, but it allows you to basically adjust the effects that you get through the vibration motors depending on the telemetry data coming out of the game. So nothing really new there, but a nice clean interface nonetheless. LED configuration, again, this is exactly the same as it has been previously, so we're not going to spend a bunch of time here, but you can configure all your telemetry here, set the priorities for the various different display panels, configure your RPM and flag LEDs. And if you want to see more detail on how all of this works, check out any one of the Fanatec wheel reviews that has this functionality and you'll see the deep dive into exactly what happens. So ITM here, again, this allows us to make adjustments to the integrated telemetry modules. So on the Porsche 911 wheel with the button module endurance, or on the display of the DD1 or DD2. So all the adjustments are there. And then we've also got our game profiles here, so we can load different profiles of different games, save them, send them to our friends, and so forth. So this is all pretty close to how it was before. Most of the changes that we're seeing in the driver software. Now, the other thing worth mentioning as well is they've also added a mobile app for Android and iOS. It's still in alpha stage at the moment, but it does seem to work quite well. And this allows you to make adjustments to all the same things that we've just been looking at here, as well as display live telemetry data too. So you can use your phone as a dash. Now, there are a lot of other apps that do things like this. So it's certainly not something that's groundbreaking or unique, but again, it's a nice ease of use thing, nice and simple, and yeah, it works quite well. So let's get out of all this stuff now and let's get into some driving. We'll start off with ACC. We're going to start off with those automatic profiles, see what that feels like, and do a bit of an analysis to see just how far the force feedback quality has come since the last time we took a look at the DD1 and DD2. Okay, so we fired up Assetto Corsa Competizione now. We've got the wheel and base set to the auto setup mode, so it's pulling in all the settings that it is recommending as a starting point. And this is genuinely the first time I've driven since we did all these updates. So I want to keep this nice and raw for you guys. Just to quickly show you as well inside the ACC settings, if we go across to controls, force feedback gain set to 90%, everything else set to 0 except for dynamic dampening at 100, and I've got the frequency set to 400 Hertz, so we get that nice granular detail inside the game. Now, I've got the steering lock set to 900 there. We've got automatic rotation set on the steering wheel too, so I'm not sure how that's going to feel. We may want to wind that down to 540, but we'll see. Just wanted to set up everything completely out of the box as it comes to begin with, just to see what the experience is like, and then I'll make some suggestions on top of that. So these are, just so you guys know as well, the exact same settings inside ACC that I run for my SimiCube 2 Ultimate base. Same settings I use to test other wheelbases too. So we did a Mozza R9 video just yesterday using these exact same settings inside ACC. So we'll hit drive again. Now, one of the observations that I had previously, just to give you a baseline point of comparison, is that there is a lot of detail, a lot of nice granular detail in the DD1 and the DD2. Being an outrunner style motor with quite a lot of rotating mass compared to some of the other options that we have on the market these days, remember again, it has been a long time since the DD1 and DD2 were released, there was a little bit of underpinning torque ripple or cogging going on. What I mean by that is when you turn the wheel, it didn't feel completely smooth. You could feel a little bit of a ripple effect, like the wheel was kind of binding. Now, it is only very slight, and it's not something that I found really affected the driving experience all that much, but the DD1 and DD2 previously definitely didn't feel as smooth as what we get these days with the, you know, the Mozza R5 all the way through to the R16 and R21, the SimiCube bases, even bases like the SimMagic Alpha, the VRS Direct Force Pro, you name it, pretty much all the direct drive bases that we've tested, with the exception of the SimMagic M10, I would say, were all a little bit smoother in that rotation than the DD1 and the DD2 are. Now, unfortunately, I do have to say that at least with these settings, there is still that underpinning effect present there. So when I rotate the wheel around, I am still feeling that slight little cogging effect going on. But let's see how it feels once we get the car underway. And again, remember, this is a very, very genuine first experience drive here. I haven't done any driving at all since we did the update. Now, when the car's in motion and you've got effects going on, you really don't notice that torque ripple as much unless you really are paying specific attention to it. Now, one of the other observations that I've had with with all of Fanatec's bases, including their belt-driven bases, getting used to these brakes again. We've swapped over the brakes since the last time, or the pedals since the last time I drove as well, so it's going to take me a little while to get used to it. But one of the observations I had there as well was that Fanatec bases tend to be very consistent between sim racing titles, so the force feedback feels quite uniform when you're switching between different games, which is something that I think is really important and something that's often overlooked. Particularly with SimiCube bases, every sim feels a little bit different, and you have to spend quite a bit of time to dial them in. And if you're switching between, say, GT3 cars in ACC and iRacing, for example, it can be a completely different driving experience, which makes the muscle memory very, very difficult to maintain. So, initial observations-wise, I feel like they've improved the filtering on the force feedback. And again, this is just running these automatic settings at the moment, but the force feedback feels less muddy than it has previously. I'm feeling a little more detail in the rate, and probably the last time I drove with a DD1 or DD2 in ACC, I think it was still sitting at around the sort of 300 hertz mark for the force feedback as well. So that will have made a difference. But in terms of the quality of the force feedback, the effects and everything, I would say it's pretty much on par with what you're getting detail-wise from the SimiCube 2 bases. The Mozza bases are very close as well. I think the Mozza bases probably aren't quite as good when it comes to the sensation of weight in the car. That's probably the thing that's standing out to me the most in ACC, is you're really getting a really strong sensation of the weight of the car and how it transfers as you're driving. So as I turn in, I really feel the weight of the car fighting against me. And as we get faster, it smoothens out. There's a good amount of sensation in the kind of, not dead zone, but the center point. There's no clunking, there's no weirdness there. I'm gonna just brake here a little bit because I'm not confident. There we go. When I went up over the rumble strip there as well, I felt a good sensation of the weight of the car kind of pushing me to the side. So there are some definite improvements there, I would say. It definitely feels more refined than it has in the past. And I'd say, looking at it in terms of the overall sensation and driving experience, it is still on par with the Mozza bases, SimiCube bases and so forth. Now, I've forgotten about it just driving around, but when I do pay attention to it, I can still feel that sensation of torque ripple, and I'd say that's probably always been the weakness in the DD1 and the DD2, and that has become more profound now compared with, you know, a lot of the other products that are available on the market now. So I don't think that it's a reason to be put off from the DD1 or DD2. I think if you like all the other things that the DD1 and DD2 has to offer in terms of functionality, ease of use, console compatibility as well, depending on obviously which model you buy, or what wheel you have attached as well, I should say. But yeah, I feel like the good outweighs the bad in that regard, but that is definitely a weakness of the DD1 and DD2 compared to some of the other stuff we have on the market today. And remembering again, back when we did the review of this, really the only other options were the SimiCube bases, at least in user-friendly type stuff, and the SimMagic M10 as well. That was very popular at that time, and that is a lot more grainy than what this is. They've since discontinued that, and they've got this SimMagic Alpha and Alpha Mini. We haven't tested the Alpha Mini, but the Alpha is very smooth, and it was, you know, that was probably a couple of years ago now that we tested that, and it was actually quite impressive at the time. So yeah, I'd say they definitely have made some improvements. It's not a massive change. I wouldn't say that it's completely transformed the driving experience, but it's definitely significantly improved it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spend a bit of time fine-tuning the force feedback, seeing if I can get a little bit more out of it for my personal preference, see if I can wind out some of that torque ripple as well. There are a few effects that you can reduce that do have a bit of an impact on that, but I think as a starting point, remembering again that we just jumped in straight out of the box and just started driving here, didn't make any adjustments to the force feedback at all. This is a very, very good experience. And if I think back to when we first reviewed the DD2 years ago now, the driving experience straight out of the box was pretty terrible. We had to spend quite a bit of time fine-tuning it to really kind of get the most out of what it was able to offer at the time. This is completely different in terms of the user experience. So while the quality of the force feedback once dialed in might be quite close, the user experience as a new user coming in, buying it and setting it up for the first time is completely different to what it has been previously. So I'll spend a bit of time now fine tuning and let's see where we land. So I spent quite a bit of time fine tuning, tweaking the adjustments and really sort of trying to get the most out of this. And look, honestly guys, the out of the box automatic settings were very, very, very good. I wouldn't sort of say that I had anything in particular that I was able to adjust that made it feel, you know, a massive amount different. Really, it was just down to those little subjective things that some people like or not like in their own settings. So I'd say as a starting point, just get started with those automatic settings, at least in ACC, and have a play around from there. Felt pretty good in iRacing as well, so no issues there either. And yeah, really impressed with the way that works. Now, I talked about the torque ripple thing before. What I wanted to do here is just quickly demonstrate how we can influence that. So it's kind of a combination between the natural damper, the natural friction, and the natural inertia settings. So if we start off by cranking the damper all the way down, so basically now we have no sensation of weight in the steering wheel at all because we don't have any friction, any inertia, or any damper. So when the wheel is just freely turning like this, there is still that slight torque ripple effect present. Now, I know that there have been some issues in the past with motor calibration too. So one of the things that I did do was go into Wheelbase and erase that motor calibration. Now that was a fix in the past for some of the issues with firmware. I don't believe it's still an issue with this one, but I tried it anyway. I tried erasing the motor calibration, testing it out with no calibration, and then recalibrating the motor. And yeah, it didn't really make any discernible difference, at least in my case. So if we go back to tuning menu settings again here. So we add extra friction. That's going to add the sensation of weight to the wheel, but it still does, and you can even see it there, like when it stops, it's kind of got that little vibration thing going on. So yeah, it certainly isn't up there with the smoothest wheelbases that we've tested, but I don't want to harp on about this too much because it really isn't something that you notice when you're driving unless you pay attention to it, but we do have to call it out because it is one of the weaknesses of the DD1 and DD2 compared to other bases. And even if you compare to the CSL DD and GT DD Pro, those are a little bit smoother than what this is using slightly newer technology. So if we increase the inertia as well, I mean, all these things are creating more sensation of realism and more sensation of, you know, the wheel being mechanically connected to something inside the car, but none of it is really getting rid. I mean, the natural damper, the more I crank that up, the more it masks it, but then you're gonna get to a point where the wheel just feels too numb. So like even there at 75%, that's way more dampened than I would wanna drive with. But yeah, so I'm gonna say my conclusion there is that there is still some torque ripple there. You can't really filter it out compared to other bases, but I don't think that it's something that is bad enough that it's gonna, you know, really impact the driving experience. But you know, if you're tossing up between this and other bases, it's something that you need to be aware of. So something that we do definitely need to mention. Now, the other thing just quickly to mention as well, another complaint that we've heard a lot is a bit of a knock on change of direction. I believe that is just something that's inherent in the QR1 style quick release. Now, we were expecting to see the QR2 from Fanatec, I want to say almost 2 years ago now, and I still don't have any news on that, unfortunately. It's something that I have been asking them about every couple of months, every time I speak to them, but it is still there. So that's, you know, that weakness in the quick release system is still something that does need to be considered compared to alternatives as well. It's going to sound harsh, but look, honestly, in my opinion, I feel like the QR1 system was originally designed when they were only doing belt-driven wheelbases. You know, they're a lot weaker than what we have here. And to put it bluntly, I just feel like the QR1 system isn't really up to the standard that it needs to be to support the torque levels that we're getting out of the DD1 and the DD2. Now, the good news is there that when the QR2 does release, it will be interchangeable on the DD1 and DD2. You can actually remove the stem out of the motor. And if you have a look at our DD2 teardown video that we did a couple of years ago now, you'll actually see we showed that entire process, how everything's put together. So yeah, it will be replaceable. It will be an upgradable part when when the QR2 comes out later on down the track. But as it stands right now, that is definitely one of the, I think the torque ripple and the general inherent weaknesses of the QR1 are definitely the Fanatec ecosystem's downfall at the moment as it relates to the DD1 and DD2. And I think there are better options on the market at this point in time in terms of those two things. But when you consider the full ecosystem, I do still feel like Fanatec does have the upper hand when it comes to a lot of these things. Ease of use in particular now, they've really stepped things up. This is really, really impressive what they've done compared to the old experience. In terms of integration of telemetry, geometry, you know, being able to change settings on the wheel on the fly. A lot of other companies have started to do things similar to that. Mozza has a smartphone app, for example, but the way this is presented so cleanly on the little display on the smaller wheels and the integrated larger display on the bases as well as the button module endurance, it just really is the class leader when it comes to ease of use in that regard, being able to change settings on the fly and whatnot. So look, in summary, I think that, you know, they definitely have come a long way since back when we tested the DD1 and the DD2 originally. It isn't to the point where I would say it was game changing, but, you know, for those who already own these bases, it's absolutely worth upgrading to these later drivers. It does, you know, improve the experience somewhat. And particularly if you're the sort of person that doesn't like to muck around with settings, you know, spend a lot of time fine tuning things, then upgrading to this and having the out of the box settings work as well as they do, I think is a real strong advantage. And we still have that consistency between the different sim titles as well. We drove in a couple of different sim titles with the setup, and it was very consistent compared to a lot of other bases. And that is without having to fine tune and adjust too many settings. Those automatic settings do work very well. So I don't know what the future holds for the DD1 and DD2. At the moment, there is a big gap between the CSL DD and the Podium range DD1 DD2. I'm assuming that at some point they're going to replace the Club Sport Wheelbase 2.5 with something direct drive that'll sit between the torque levels of the DD1, DD2 and the CSL DD and GT DD Pro. I don't know what that's going to look like or what kind of power levels it will have, but I do feel like the technology that we're seeing here with the DD1, DD2 in terms of the motor is starting to get a little bit long in the tooth when you compare it to some of the other options on the market today, just because of that torque ripple. I think that's something that's just inherent to the characteristics of the motor, and it isn't so noticeable, if noticeable at all, on the GT DD Pro or CSL DD. So I'm guessing the Club Sport Wheelbase DD, when it comes out, if that's what it ends up being called, will probably have a little bit less torque ripple than the DD1, DD2. So if you are looking at buying a DD1 or DD2, without knowing when we're likely to maybe see a replacement for that Club Sport Wheelbase 2.5, it's hard to say whether it's a good buy now or not, to be honest with you guys. But I think that they still work very well for what they are. I don't think that you're going to be disappointed with the experience. It's definitely worth considering some of the other options that are on the market, and we do have review videos on pretty much all of them available right here on this channel, so definitely check those out. But yeah, if you've got your heart set on a Fanatec base, maybe you're already invested in the ecosystem, maybe you've got a couple of wheels and some pedals, or maybe you just want to be able to use it on console and there's, you know, limited options available. Otherwise, I do think that it's still a good option. So really hope that today's video has helped you out, guys. Let us know what your experience is like with these newer drivers as well if you do own this gear, and yeah, love to hear your opinions down in the comments below as always. So thank you very much for watching, guys. As always, if you do want to pick up any of the gear you've seen in today's video, there are some links down in the description which are an awesome way to help support the channel at no additional cost to you. Definitely check out those reviews of some of the alternative products that we've talked about today as well. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you again very soon. Bye.